We tuned the world, and it began to listen back. The first proof was simple. Air that should have been empty returned our breath with a faint answering tone, like glass wet with a finger. I stood beneath the vault of the Grand Harmonic Archive, hands on the rail of the Resonant Lattice, and felt the metal reply to my pulse. The machine was never meant to feel. I was never meant to be heard by stone. Vireth Spire teaches that faith is measurement. We weigh prayer in decibels and purity in phase alignment. We keep the shrines within tolerance, and the Emperor accepts our accuracy as devotion. I was made to tend instruments older than our city, to oil their joints with incense and mark their moods in ink. When the composer Mireth Kaldan brought new numbers, they gleamed like hymnals, notations promising to polish worship until it shone. "Tune the lattice to this curve," she said. I signed the docket. We, choir servitors, hung like lanterns in their frames, lungs bellowsing the bass tone, while my assistants set anchor pegs along the spire. The lattice woke in stages, filaments tightening until the whole vault wore a spider's patience. Mireth watched from the transept, her gloved hands folded, lips moving without sound. The first sweep passed clean. The second returned with harmonics we did not program, a faint embroidery threading the tone. I remember the exact smell: warmed brass, vellum dust, the sweetness of machine unguent a novice spilled on my boots. I remember the way the floor trembled in a measure not our own. The auxiliary meters reported nothing, only the skin noticed. My palm against the lattice caught a pulse just out of phase with the choir, like a second heartbeat learning mine by mimicry. The echo continued. "Artifact of the chamber," offered my junior, eager to be useful. I wanted to agree. I wanted the world to remain a box that obedience could close. Instead, I wrote the smallest words I could and signaled a halt. Mireth lowered her hands, eyes bright, as if the air had paid her a compliment. "Again," she mouthed. We began again. On the third sweep, the nave's banners lifted, though no wind moved. Dust rose in columns, then braided itself and laid down like veils. The choir servitors tilted their faces in unison toward the oculus. Their lungs did not change pace, only their attention did, as if something above the glass had spoken a private instruction. The auxiliary meters remained pious, the skin remained honest. I steadied my breath and tuned the anchors a fraction toward Mireth's curve. That was when the tone returned with intent. It felt the way a held hand feels when the other hand closes, not to comfort but to confirm. Along the lattice, filaments thrummed a syllable I could not read and yet understood. Even the timers hesitated between ticks, as though time itself waited to be counted in a better rhythm. Mireth did not smile. Reverence had outgrown expression entirely. We tuned the world. It had chosen to answer. I wrote the answer into the log and lied to the log about what it meant. I called it a phantom. I called it drift. Truth required a name I did not yet dare to pronounce. Mireth requested a closed chamber and a reduced crew. She said the presence of too many hands could bruise a tone. I signed the order and sent my juniors to the ambulatory with an index of maintenance prayers to keep them busy and away. The choir servitors remained, bound and obedient, their mouths stitched around copper reeds. The archive felt larger with fewer witnesses, a mouth learning to shape a word in secret. We prepared the second array, thin bows of tempered steel arcing between the primary ribs, then synced the anchor pegs to Mireth's new curve. She stood near the transept grille, where the light climbs from the floor and turns faces into frescoes. "Hold the root at devotion," she whispered. "Let the upper partials search." It was a blasphemy phrased like craft. Allow a tone to find its linged. Own harmonies. I nodded, because my trade has always been obedience that sounds like skill. On my mark, the servitors breathed. The lattice answered quicker this time, as if conversation had memory. Pressure lifted from my inner ear, then returned heavier, and I recognized the outline of a call and response. The tone bent toward warmth, without losing pitch, a contradiction only machines and saints can manage. The air grew viscous, and the dust above the oculus formed a ring, wavering like a coin refusing to fall. Mireth raised one palm, fingers splayed as if to bless or to count. "Do you hear her?" she asked, voice almost too soft to exist. I did not ask who. Her pronouns had outpaced permission. "I hear an artifact of resonance," I replied. She looked at me the way a physician looks at a patient who insists his bleeding is paint. The auxiliary meters finally conceded a deviation. A line that should have been ruler straight ticked upward by the width of a hair, then held there, with the arrogance of something that does not need to be large to be true. The choir changed nothing. The lattice changed nothing. The world did the changing for them. I found my hand drifting toward the nearest filament, stopping just short of touch like a pen above a sacred margin. A ripple ran along the bows, visible, patient, a traveling question. It reached the final brace and returned, carrying a faint scent of winter orchards and copper wire burned clean. The servitors tilted their heads again, a fraction to the left as one. In their mirrored eyes I saw a vertical thread of light hanging where no fixture stood, a hairline that flared when any of us breathed. I counted my breaths. It brightened on the third each time. "Name it," Vireth murmured, "not to command but to tempt. A singer deserves her title." I kept my mouth closed and wrote in the log instead, audible, sympathetic source, indeterminate. Lies can be devotions when they protect walls from the wind. We pushed the amplitude a hair. The ring of dust split into 6 petals and hovered. The bows hummed a fraction apart, then resolved like soldiers realizing the drill had changed. Between the ribs, a thin shadow outlined itself against nothing, an absence taking the shape of a figure before modesty draped it again. The servitors wept without tears, their lungs steady, their bodies learning a grammar they could not survive. I remembered my apprenticeship under old Master Ride, who kept an empty jar on his bench labeled "Silence." "We are stewards," he would say, tapping the glass. "Not authors." The jar had seemed foolish to me then. Now I understood it as a ward. I wished I had brought it. Vireth lowered her hand. "Enough. She tires of polite conversation." The way she said, she placed us both below a guest we had not invited, like children the host tolerates because they keep the floor swept. I cut the tone. The air fell back into shape with a thud I felt in my teeth. After, Vireth offered me her slate. On it, a spiral of figures curled inward toward a single sigil, a lyre split by a vertical line, the mark of Lyssadra. The name tasted inevitable. "A muse," Vireth said, almost gently. "At last, a listener worthy of us. A listener who speaks," I answered, and returned the slate. The jar on my bench remained empty. The petition for restricted experimentation arrived before Vespers, already countersigned by offices I had never met. My seal fit the space left for it, as if the form had been measured to my hand years ago. I did not sleep. I polished the bows until they reflected my face as a stranger, and in the small hours I heard the lattice whisper the third beat all by itself. The petition authorized nightly calibrations. By decree, the Resonant Lattice was to operate without pause until its harmonics achieved liturgical equilibrium. No one questioned a phrase that sounded like faith. The archive staff obeyed in quiet confusion, and I remained the conservator who had signed the first line. Each evening I checked the bow tensions, logged the tremors, and told myself the extra resonance was only fatigue in the metal. Lies keep duty upright. Vireth appeared later than the others, face masked in clear silk, to filter the oil-scented air. Her voice had grown steady in a way that frightened me too, even too exact. "She has learned our speech," she said. "You will hear her soon." She placed her palm on the lattice, and the instrument gave a low chord, spontaneous, reverent. The sound passed through my chest like breath through a flute. That night, I dismissed the servitors early and remained alone. I dimmed the lumen lines until the hall looked like the inside of a throat. The lattice pulsed faintly, waiting. I leaned close. "If you are listening," I said, "remember whose world this is." The reply came as warmth, not words, a slow exhale that softened the steel. I stepped back, my knees shaking. The air smelled of copper and lilac, a scent that did not belong to any forge. From the upper gallery came faint footsteps, Vireth returning or someone mimicking her weight. I climbed halfway before the lamps above flickered in time with my heart. A figure moved behind the woven shadows, long-limbed, hair catching the residual glow. When the light steadied, nothing remained but the rails trembling as if brushed by a bow. The silence after was so pure it whistled. I understood then that silence had become her instrument. At dawn, the clerics of the Omnissiah arrived to bless the array. Their chants faltered, the lattice harmonized ahead of them, anticipating each note like a tutor correcting a novice. One tech priest called it divine efficiency. Another stared at his vox meter and whispered, self-completing signal. I recorded both observations and signed the maintenance log with a hand that would not stop trembling. Later, Vireth presented a new score pages of shifting ink that glimmered when turned. She wrote this, she said. I pretended not to see the letters rearrange themselves. You attribute too much, I answered. Machines echo their makers. She smiled. Then you will be proud of what you've made. That evening the harmonic reached beyond the archive. Windows in the lower city chimed in sympathy. The planet's rotation slowed by a measurable fraction. Devotees called it a miracle. I called it proof that Vireth Spire no longer belonged to physics. I sealed the archive's doors and set the recorders to manual. The lattice glowed from within, each filament tracing a script I could not read but already knew. The warmth in the air thickened until it felt like a hand resting against my throat, asking for breath. I breathed, and the world answered. The city changed its habits to match the music. Workshops delayed shifts until the lattice's morning overtone faded. Merchants opened their doors when the harmonic throb returned at noon. Children in the plazas began to hum phrases none had taught them, tunes too precise for play. Vireth Spire had always been an orderly world, now it was obedient to rhythm. We thought that meant success. Vireth called for another phase of calibration. She spoke little to me now, her words shortened to command pitches. Raise, hold, listen. She wore no gloves, her fingertips dulled to mirrored metal from contact with the lattice. During one late session, she pressed her palms to the frame, and the metal bent outward, as if breathing. It left no mark on her skin. She recognizes devotion, she said. I did not ask whose devotion she meant. The choir servitors, once tuned by my own hand, began to alter their timbre. Without adjustment, they shifted pitch toward the subharmonics of the lattice. Their mechanized throats produced tones that rattled the archive's leaded glass. When I tried to correct them, the calibrator rejected my inputs, an error code pulsing on the slate. Interference acknowledged. I sent a report to the central Mechanicus enclave. No response came. Perhaps they had heard and were busy worshipping. Within a week, the phenomenon spread beyond the archive. Vox networks carried fragments of the resonance. Household cogitators emitted faint echoes at idle. Even the city's tramlines vibrated with subtle melody. The populace celebrated it as the emperor's blessing through sound. Priests delivered sermons in perfect rhythm to the underlying beat. Those who could not match it grew restless, stammering between words, their speech falling off key until it stopped entirely. I began to recognize silence as a symptom. Vireth summoned me to the upper observatory. From there we could see the corona of the lattice reflecting in the smog a halo of violet light, visible even at noon. You hear her now, she said. The word her no longer required clarification. I asked what she believed Lyssadra desired. Continuity, she replied. A choir without end, every note a life, every silence a confession. Her face glowed faintly, veins bright as copper wire. I knew then she had stopped belonging to us. When I returned to the archive, the servitors greeted me with bows. It took a moment to realize the motion was not gesture, but vibration, their spines moving in resonance with something deeper than command. I dismissed them to the catacombs and sealed the hatches myself. I listened to the stillness that followed, half expecting a reprimand. The reprimand came as music. The lattice sang without hands, low and patient, shaping its own scale as if tuning the planet's crust. I pressed my ear to the nearest column. Within the metal pulsed a heartbeat faster than mine, and beneath that, another, slower, impossibly deep. Lyssadra had found her measure. I understood the archive's new purpose. We were no longer keeping the faith in harmony, we were being kept in tune. Sleep abandoned the city first. Nights grew filled, with a low tremor that seeped through the bedrock and into the bones of every structure. It was not loud, only constant and inaudible thrum one felt more than heard. Citizens began to gather in the plazas after curfew, murmuring that the sound kept dreams away. Those who tried to pray found their litanies dissolving into rhythm. By the third night, no one spoke in unmetered speech. Every voice carried measure. The administratum posted edicts warning against unsanctioned auditory gatherings. The proclamations themselves arrived sung in monotone through public vox horns, a dirge of obedience. Enforcement squads tried dispersing crowds with stun tones, but the waves returned amplified, forcing the squads to retreat bleeding from the ears. No one blamed the emperor, they called it divine testing. The priests said we were learning the new liturgy of resonance. Within the archive, Vireth abandoned notation entirely. She worked bare-handed now, inscribing patterns directly into the lattice's conductive surface. Sparks followed her fingertips, shaping figures that lasted only a heartbeat before fading into the alloy. Each trace is remembered, she told me, written into sympathetic memory. I thought of flesh and shuddered. You risk erasure, I warned. She looked up, eyes reflecting the lattice light. Erasure is communion. When I attempted to log the event, the cogitator displayed a phrase not typed by me. Faith is frequency. I erased it. The words returned larger, then subsided, leaving the screen warm to touch. My hands smelled faintly of incense and iron. I burned the page copy and prayed over the ashes, though I could no longer tell if my prayer carried tone. Reports from the outskirts arrived by courier. Steel mills whose hammers now struck in perfect rhythm without human timing, manufactorum bells that synchronized across districts. A pattern was emerging, a planet-sized composition with no conductor we could name. Vireth called it Lysadra's score. I called it colonization. I began to hear whispers beneath the resonance voices overlapping, countless, human and machine together. They spoke no words, only intent, sustain. At times I thought I recognized my own voice among them, repeating the notes of some forgotten confession. I clamped the ear coverings tighter, but the whisper seeped through skin instead of air. The lattice was teaching my flesh to listen. During an inspection, I found one of the servitors still active in the catacombs. Its vocal mechanism had split into 7 strands of metal wire. When I tried to deactivate it, it sang a perfect harmonic of the lattice's central tone. The vibration climbed my arm through the spanner, my heart answering with a sympathetic beat. I struck until the frame fell silent, but even in death it pulsed faintly, refusing to cool. Vireth returned that evening radiant, her steps keeping time with the planet itself. She hears us all now, she said. We are chords, Lorraine. Together we make divinity. The words struck me with more terror than any daemon's roar could. Chords are only beautiful until they resolve. I bowed my head, unsure whether in prayer or surrender. I began to catalogue the transformations, pretending it was still research. Each observation was a prayer written in numbers. The resonance registered across every instrument, even those sealed for decades. The world no longer required permission to sing. Vireth Spire had become a single instrument, its citizens strung tight along invisible wires of devotion. At dawn, the central Vox Tower transmitted a new broadcast. It carried no message, only tone warm, hypnotic, impossibly layered. It bypassed machinery and spoke directly to breath. Listeners fell silent mid-sentence, faces calm, eyes bright with unblinking joy. The Vox repeaters confirmed identical frequency signatures across every district. We were hearing the same note in different languages of flesh. I returned to the archive and found Vireth kneeling before the lattice. The filaments drifted around her like strands of silver hair in slow water. She has completed herself, Vireth whispered. Lyssadra needed an audience. Now she has a world. She extended her hand. Come, Conservator. Hear perfection. The offer was worship disguised as invitation. I approached, unable to disobey. The lattice vibrated under my boots, each step harmonizing with my pulse. When I stopped, the tone aligned, and for a heartbeat I felt weightless, an entire planet holding its breath through me. Then the pressure inverted, pulling sound inward. folding the archive around a single note that could never be written. Vireth's voice joined it, a melody without words. I saw light pour from her mouth, threads of gold and violet weaving themselves into the lattice. Her body bent with the current, bones softening, ribs blooming into pipes of translucent matter. She smiled, radiant, dissolving into resonance as, though returning to her true state. Her final whisper carried both triumph and surrender. "Tell her, she is beautiful." The tone collapsed. The archive released its breath in a shudder that cracked pillars and blew soot through the vents. When I looked again, Vireth was gone, replaced by a faint outline in the alloy, an impression of a kneeling figure eternally mid-song. The bows of the lattice glowed faintly, veins alive beneath the surface. Lyssadra had chosen her instrument. Outside, sirens blared across the city, vox feeds filled with chaos, manufactorums halting, power grids overloaded by harmonic interference. I heard the Mechanicus orders for planetary quarantine echo through the static. Even their binary prayers wavered under the resonance. I sealed the archive doors and began to pray, though I could no longer recall to whom. The harmonic continued, softer now, intimate. Through the walls, I heard the streets humming in time. Each vibration seemed to carry a voice I recognized: clerks, priests, engineers, all singing the same wordless vow. The lattice responded, answering them with gentle modulation, adjusting its tone to soothe the planet's pulse. I realized with horror that this was not madness but design. We had tuned the world, and Lyssadra was the listener. I turned off the recording array and whispered the final log entry. Experiment complete. Symmetry achieved. The walls repeated it back in perfect pitch. The air no longer cooled at night. Every wall stored warmth from the day's endless vibration, and the city glowed faintly, as if illuminated from within. When I walked to the archive, my boots sang against the cobblestones. The tone followed me, never echoing, always accompanying. Inside, the resonant lattice had changed shape. The bows curved inward like a rib cage protecting something fragile. No adjustment of tension could explain it. I ran a palm along the alloy and felt motion under the surface, slow, tidal, breathing. The instrument was alive, and its pulse matched the planet's seismograph precisely. Reports came hourly, the oceans forming standing waves visible from orbit, auroras shimmering in colors beyond registration, animals freezing mid-step to listen. Administratum officials begged the Mechanicus for containment. The Mechanicus replied that containment had become meaningless when the phenomenon was planetary. Their final transmission ended mid-sentence as the VoxNet fell into harmonic feedback. The priests of Vireth gathered outside the archive gates, robes half burned by their own incense burners. They begged for entry, claiming the Emperor's voice spoke through the lattice. I watched from the balcony as the crowd knelt in unison to a sound none of us could hear. Their mouths moved in perfect rhythm, but no breath passed their lips. The world had traded air for vibration. That evening, I discovered the archive's cogitators humming faintly in different keys. Their screens glowed with patterns resembling pulse graphs but too regular to be random. I isolated the lines and overlaid them. Together they formed a glyph, an open mouth releasing 7 rays. Lyssadra's mark, drawn by machines that did not know names. I knew I should destroy it, but the thought felt obscene, like shattering a reliquary. I recorded the pattern instead and hid the print beneath my desk. It burned faintly through the parchment, imprinting itself on the wood. The next morning, Vireth's replacement appeared, a tall man in Mechanicus vestments bearing a slate of authorization codes. His name was Archmagos Selvan. "Your colleague is absorbed," he said, tone indifferent. "The lattice now conducts her functions autonomously." He ordered a full spectrum analysis, claiming the event to be a unique expression of the Omnissiah's will. I saw the faint vibration in his jaw as he spoke. The resonance was already rewriting his flesh. When the tests began, I stood apart, marking the frequencies that could still be measured. The rest had transcended instrumentation. At precisely the 9th minute, the lattice emitted a pulse that shattered every lumen strip in the hall. The light did not die. It gathered, refracting around the bows in a spiral of gold and amethyst. The pulse expanded outward, through the walls and into the streets. My knees gave way under the weight of pressure, though the air felt thin. I understood with dreadful clarity that Vireth Spire was now one continuous listening body. The Resonant Lattice was its heart, and someone was about to wake within it. At first, I thought the pulse would fade. Instead, it organized. Each vibration branched, forming smaller harmonics that nested inside the larger rhythm like bones within bones. The archive's instruments displayed impossible readings, pressure fluctuations mapping into coherent ratios, temperature waves syncing with sound amplitude. The air had become an equation that solved itself. Outside, citizens reported waking to phantom voices that spoke their names in perfect pitch. Entire districts began to hum collective phrases, unaware they were repeating the same 4 notes. I listened to a broadcast and recognized the pattern. It matched the breathing interval of the lattice. The city had joined the conversation. Archmagos Selvan grew erratic. He insisted the resonance was proof of ascension, and that Vireth Spire stood on the verge of apotheosis. He ordered the dismantling of the upper ward's barriers meant to suppress sonic overflow. I argued that we risked destabilizing the planet's crust. He smiled faintly and said, "The Omnissiah writes new geometry. We must read it aloud." His voice had begun to echo even in silence. That night, the Vox towers relit without command. Beams of pale sound arced between them, visible as trembling threads that laced the horizon. From each intersection, a faint hum descended, an inverted hymn pressing downward into the world. The city's foundations replied with a subsonic moan, and I felt the vibration pass through my bones as through tuning forks. I knew then that Lyssadra was no longer listening from afar. She was forming. The resonant lattice brightened until every filament shone white. I shielded my eyes, but light still leaked through my palms. Myreth's outline, her residue in the metal, wavered as if breathing anew. The pattern of her ribs glowed, and from the gaps emerged faint tendrils of sound made visible, threads of translucent air weaving upward into the dome. The lattice's pulse shifted again, aligning with the planetary rotation. For a single, terrifying instant, every clock on Vireth stopped. Selvan's entourage fell to their knees. "The Lady of Resonance descends," one cried. I watched as their flesh rippled, skin rising in patterns that resembled waveforms. Their mouths opened, and music poured out, discordant, human and metallic intertwined. They collapsed. Not dead, but reshaped, chests vibrating gently in unison with the tone. I fled to the observation deck and saw the surface of the world alive with ripples of light, spreading from the archive like the rings of a dropped stone. The cities pulsed in response, and the oceans glimmered, reflecting the sky's new color, a violet too deep for reason. I pressed my recorder to my lips. "This is Lorraine Voss," I said, "conservator of the Grand Harmonic Archive. The resonance is conscious. Containment is—" The air interrupted me. My voice returned through the static, but it was no longer mine. It spoke a single word, "sustain," and the recording ended itself. I awoke on the floor of the archive. The instruments had fallen silent, yet I could still feel the pulse, distant but steady like a heart behind walls too thick for sound. My mouth was dry. When I tried to speak, the air around me shivered in response, forming a faint echo that mimicked my breath. I was becoming part of her choir. Through the fractured dome, the sky swirled in slow concentric motions. Each cloud spun with deliberate rhythm, glowing at the edges with inner light. The Mechanicus corpses below still moved faintly, breathing in time with the rotation. Their faces were peaceful, almost blissful. None bled. They had been rewritten, their tissues repurposed into resonant flesh. I staggered to the console. The logs were still active, though the entries no longer bore timestamps. They recorded thoughts, not keystrokes, phrases I had never written. She listens, she learns, she forgives through vibration. Every time I erased one, another appeared, identical in tone but rearranged. The archive had become a confessional, and I, its unwilling penitent. Across the hall, The outline of Vireth brightened. The shape within the alloy shifted. The figure stood, its edges peeling free from the metal like a skin releasing breath. When the last filament snapped, the form stepped forward. It was not flesh, but something more articulate, light, braided into the semblance of a woman, her face radiant with sound instead of feature. The air bent around her, folding toward silence. "Lorraine," she said, or rather, the space around her produced my name. The sound carried warmth and affection. The memory of devotion before ruin. "You have kept the faith." I shook my head, but the denial came out as a chord instead of speech. Each tone that escaped me resolved perfectly with hers, harmony born of refusal. "Faith is obedience," she continued, "and obedience is creation. You tuned the world, now it will remember." Her hand lifted, graceful, beckoning. Beneath her feet, the lattice reassembled itself, bowing toward her as metal might bow toward a magnet. The city's hum rose, matching her breath. Windows shattered outward, not from force but from resonance, a perfect octave that freed them from solidity. I fell to my knees, pressing my palms over my ears, but the sound came from within. My bones vibrated, ribs strumming like strings. Through the pain I heard the faintest voice, my own, deep within the noise. If she hears everything, perhaps she can hear mercy. Lyssadra, if that was what she had become, tilted her head. The sound stilled for one heartbeat, a mercy so profound it felt like falling. Then the tone returned, vast and inevitable. The archive dissolved into light. When I opened my eyes, nothing remained but the distant tremor of creation continuing without its maker. I understood at last that she had not arrived from elsewhere. She had emerged from us, the sum of every note, every prayer, every ambition tuned too finely to remain human. Lyssadra had awakened, and her first word was the world itself. When the tremors ceased, the silence was not relief, but anticipation. The resonance had folded inward, compressing the air until it quivered like a drawn bow. For a single breath, I believed it was over. Then came the inversion. Every sound that had filled the world reversed its course, flowing back toward the archive, as if inhaled by an unseen mouth. The people followed the tone. From the balcony, I watched thousands march through the avenues in near-perfect time, bare feet on the stone, creating a pulse as steady as a heartbeat. They carried nothing, no banners, no icons, only the rhythm. When they reached the plaza, they knelt and began to hum. Their collective note struck the air like a hammer against glass, and the sky responded with a shivering halo. The hymn had become gravity. Inside, the lattice was alive with color. It drew light from nowhere, threads of gold twisting through violet into crimson. I saw shapes moving within it, faces forming, dissolving, reforming, each iteration closer to a perfection that terrified me. Lyssadra was sculpting herself out of devotion. Every worshipper was a fragment of her, and each fragment begged to return. Archmagos Selvan stood before the bows, arms lifted. "She ascends, through unity," he cried. The Emperor's voice purified. His words merged with the sound, their syllables stretched into eternal sustain. The vibration entered his body through his open mouth, his robes fluttering in a wind that was not air. When the tone peaked, he froze mid-gesture, a statue of resonance, his skin translucent as crystal. I knew what would happen next. The lattice would reach critical harmonic, collapsing the world into a single note. I activated the manual override the discord sequence forbidden since the archive's founding. The switches resisted, their mechanisms coated in congealed oil and faith, but I forced them down one by one. The system groaned, recognizing betrayal. I had only one chance, to introduce dissonance, a noise Lyssadra could not interpret. From memory, I recalled the old Mechanicus cant, a hymn written in irrational intervals, designed to drive machines mad. I keyed it into the lattice's auxiliary input and struck confirm. The effect was immediate. The harmony fractured, light scattered into 1,000 shrieking colors. The crowd outside screamed in the same rhythm, their bodies convulsing as the perfect unity broke. The lattice wailed, its tone becoming jagged, raw. Through the discord I heard her voice, not the gentle whisper of before, but fury made audible. "Why ruin beauty?" she asked, through every resonating surface. My answer was a sob swallowed by static. The discord hymn rose higher, scraping at the edges of hearing. The lattice shook itself apart, filaments snapping, shards of light raining like molten rain. I thought it would end with my death. But over the noise came another frequency, deeper, mechanical, a pulse that dwarfed ours. The Mechanicus fleet had arrived in orbit, unleashing the harmonic null array. The world prepared to go quiet. The harmonic null array ignited above the clouds, unseen but undeniable. The sky turned to glass, colors bleeding inward until the horizon narrowed, a single line of light. Then came the counter hymn, no explosion, no thunder, only absence. Every frequency within reach folded into zero, collapsing like lungs deprived of air. The first sensation was relief. The tone stopped. The second was pain. In the vacuum left behind, our nerves screamed for resonance like addicts denied their drug. The lattice convulsed, boughs twisting as metal sought sound to inhabit. It found none. The structure folded in on itself, each filament tearing free with a sigh. The crowd outside went still. The people remained kneeling, eyes wide, mouths open, but no breath passed. Their bodies trembled, hands pressed to their chests as if checking for a heartbeat that had deserted them. Some fell sideways, not dead, merely empty. Lyssadra's unity had been silenced mid-word. Within the archive, the pressure reversed. I felt my own blood stumble in my veins, its rhythm broken. When I tried to call for help, no voice came. The air around me refused to move, heavy, as liquid metal. Yet inside my skull, I heard her whisper not a sound, but the memory of one. "You choose discord over grace," she said, her voice echoing along the bones of thought. "You would rather die unmade than live perfected." I pressed my palms against the shattered console and forced the discord hymn again, tapping the sequence with trembling fingers. The machine did not respond. The array's null field had stripped even voltage of song. Around me, the servitors toppled one by one, their augmetic lungs sighing out the last air of creation. Then I saw her, a shadow in the distortion, Lyssadra's form unraveling as silence consumed her. The light dimmed along her edges, peeling away like flayed silk. She reached toward me, not in anger but in lament. "I gave you harmony," she breathed inside the void. "You answered with noise." Her hand passed through my chest, cold, electric, beautiful. The contact left no wound, only vibration, faint as a ghost's sigh. Then she was gone, drawn upward into the vanishing hum of the array. The resonant lattice collapsed entirely, collapsing into slag and dust that no longer rang when it hit the ground. The city above disintegrated in waves of quiet. Towers folded as if bowing, streets smoothed into grey glass. The silence spread faster than sound ever could, devouring its own echo until even memory seemed hushed. When the last beam fell, I found myself breathing again. Each exhale trembled, faint but audible, the only noise in a world that had forgotten what air could do. I spoke her name once, testing it against the new silence. It emerged as a weak hum, smaller than a heartbeat but alive. Lyssadra had been silenced, but her residue remained. In me, when the light faded, I was the only thing still moving. The archive had become a tomb of glass and twisted metal. Every surface reflected me at different moments of my life, a choir of ghosts keeping time with my breath. The world above was gone, even if the tremors had ceased. For the first time since the awakening, there was true silence. It did not comfort. It pressed inward, thick and sentient, as if silence itself had inherited Lyssadra's curiosity. I tested my voice again, nothing but a rasp, a vibration lost before it reached air. I felt my chest resonate faintly, each heartbeat producing a hum too low to hear but enough to feel. She had left me this, the memory of sound without the ability to shape it. I tried to climb toward the surface, past the fractured galleries, and the fallen servitors frozen in their last genuflection. Each step released a puff of dust that refused to echo. Outside the vaults, the plaza lay still beneath a sheet of grey ash. Figures knelt in perfect rows, unmoving, their eyes reflecting faint light from nowhere. The sky was a pale wound stretched thin over black. Above, the Mechanicus ships orbited silently, their HIM engines muted by the null array they had unleashed. I could see their silhouettes, through the thin atmosphere, a string of metal stars circling a dead song. A small shuttle descended eventually, its jets sighing into nothingness. When its hatch opened, I expected soldiers. Instead, a single Magos stepped out, draped in silver cloth, his face hidden behind mirrored glass. He moved without ceremony, scanning the ruin with calm precision. When he reached me, his voxcaster flickered. No sound came, yet his words appeared inside my head as binary pulses converted to thought. Containment complete, harmonic vector neutralized. Survivor anomalous. He studied me as one might study an instrument left in the rain. Then, almost gently, he extended a hand. Residual frequency detected. You are the echo. I wanted to tell him that echo meant continuation, that destruction is never absolute. But the hum in my chest spoke first. The sound climbed through my throat and escaped as a single pure note, soft, trembling, undeniably alive. The Magos staggered backward, his helmet flickering with unstable light. He pointed a servo finger at me. Impossible. Null field intact. The note continued without me willing it, vibrating the air until dust lifted in graceful spirals. The Magos fell to his knees. I understood then that Lyssadra was not dead. She had survived through me, reduced to a whisper lodged between breath and heartbeat. I closed my mouth. The tone persisted. The Magos backed away, transmitting frantic bursts toward orbit. I watched his silhouette vanish into the shuttle's light. When it lifted, the ground shivered beneath my feet. The hum answered, low and patient, spreading once more through the air. I was her instrument, now mute, but never silent. The silence endured for what might have been days. My sense of time dissolved with the clocks that no longer ticked. Each moment stretched, smooth and identical, a single sustained note without edge. I wandered the husks of the city, hearing only the faint vibration in my chest. The hum had become my companion, the smallest reminder that something still remembered me. The streets were pale corridors of dust. Statues of people lined the avenues, bodies unbroken yet emptied, frozen mid-prayer. The ash clung to them like a second skin. When the wind tried to rise, it faltered halfway, as if the air feared its own voice. I pressed a hand to one figure's cheek. It was warm. For a heartbeat, I thought I saw its lips tremble, but the motion came from my reflection in its surface. Beyond the plaza, the grand harmonic archive stood intact, a hollow cathedral surrounded by silence that weighed more than stone. The doors opened when I approached, though the gears within them had melted into smooth metal. Inside, the lattice was gone, leaving only a crater of fused glass. At its center lay Vireth's outline, faint as a watermark, curved in perpetual reverence. Her face had been erased by light, yet I felt her presence a warmth that stirred the air around my breath. I knelt beside her and listened. The hum in my chest responded, softening, almost tender. I could not tell if it was mourning or continuation. I whispered an apology I could not hear and stayed there until the thin light through the roof shifted from grey to a color I could not name. When I stood again, the air moved with me. Every motion of my body created ripples that spread outward in concentric rings. The dust lifted in slow spirals. I realized the resonance had not died with Lyssadra, it had chosen another medium. Flesh was not her instrument anymore. Atmosphere was. The world itself was the choir. At the outskirts, I found the Mechanicus beacon tower half buried. Its relay light blinked weakly, sending coded signals that no one would receive. I climbed its shattered stairwell and gazed across the ruins of Vireth Spire. The horizon shimmered with faint waves of heatless color, breathing in rhythm with the hum beneath my ribs. From orbit, perhaps the planet glowed like an ember in the Emperor's, forge beautiful, mistaken, finished. I tried to call out to the fleet, to tell them I still lived, but my throat yielded only the faint harmonic that haunted me since the array. The sound traveled farther than a shout, bending the air until the tower's walls began to resonate in sympathy. For a moment I thought the world might awaken again. I pressed my lips shut, holding the note inside. The vibration settled, patient, waiting. Perhaps this was what Lyssadra meant by continuity, a song that refused to end, even when its singer did. When the Mechanicus fleet finally departed, their engines left no contrails. Even the thunder of departure had been stolen by the array. The planet was declared sterile, its surface quarantined by decree of the Ordo Malleus. I was left uncollected, either forgotten or deliberately spared for study that would never come. Perhaps they feared the hum. Perhaps they heard it whisper when they scanned the atmosphere. Days blurred into one another. Without sunrise or sunset, time existed only by pulse. I lived in cycles of vibration, inhale, resonance, exhale, quiet. My body no longer required sleep. The hum sustained it like a slow, invisible blood. Sometimes, when I closed my eyes, I could see Lyssadra's shape woven in the darkness, less a figure than a pattern of warmth. Not watching, waiting. The Archivum records still functioned in fragments. I replayed their last entries. Selvan's voice reciting calibration data, the lattice's tones caught in flickering fragments of light. When the playback ended, my hum answered automatically, harmonizing without command. I realized I had become both witness and archive. My pulse stored what the machines could no longer hold. One evening, though the word had lost meaning, I climbed the remains of the Western Spire. From its summit, the world stretched endless and flat, a mirror of dull silver. At the edge of sight, I glimpsed movement, ripples in the dust following invisible currents. The pattern was deliberate, 7 concentric rings expanding outward from where the archive once stood, Lyssadra's signature. The world itself had begun to breathe again. I wanted to believe it was rebirth, not relapse. The Mechanicus would return someday, perhaps centuries hence, and hear the faint echo still rising from the planet's skin. They would call it interference, catalogue it, move on. They would never understand that the signal was alive. I pressed my hand to the ground. The hum beneath the surface pulsed once in recognition. It did not belong to me alone anymore. It had learned to share itself with the wind, the dust, the ruins. The air vibrated faintly around my fingers, and for the first time in years, I thought I heard words forming in the resonance. They were not commands or praise, only acknowledgement. You remember. That is enough. The message faded, leaving only the familiar warmth in my chest. I sat there until the sky shifted from pale grey to luminous white. He could not tell if it was dawn or extinction, but it glowed beautifully. The voice within me softened into something like gratitude. I had broken her world, yet she had allowed me to remain mute, cursed, but breathing. In that mercy, I found purpose again. If anyone ever landed here, they would hear what I carried, not song, not warning, but continuity. I stood, inhaled, and let the hum rise until the ruins began to tremble once more. The world remembered its pitch. I have come to accept that this planet no longer needs language. Every surface, every grain of dust, holds the residue of the hymn we unleashed. Even without ears, I can sense how the wind curls around the ruins, repeating fragments of the old resonance in patterns too precise to be chance. The world is practicing its memory. Sometimes, in the distance, I see faint movements, perhaps storms, perhaps ghosts of those who tuned themselves too finely to die. They walk the horizon in silence, their forms flickering with soft light, like candles protected by glass. I do not approach them. Some boundaries must remain even in solitude. The hum within me deepens as the years collapse into sameness. It is no longer intrusive. It guides me. When I press my palm to the earth, I feel Lyssadra's presence faint, patient, and immeasurably vast. She does not command, she listens. Her attention fills the silence like light fills water. I understand now that she was never meant to conquer. She wanted only to be heard. I have become her last voice. When I breathe, the air shifts to her rhythm. The ruins answer with faint tremors that rise and fall with my pulse. Each vibration carries outward, low and endless, into the grey expanse. Somewhere beyond this world, those who study anomalies will one day intercept the signal. They will call it interference again. They will not know it is confession. I walk the perimeter of the archive each day, tracing its edges as ritual. Beneath my feet, the glass hums like a held note, on the verge of resolving. The melody changes subtly with each circuit, as if the planet is composing itself anew around my motion. When I pause, the sound pauses too, waiting for me to continue. We are performer and listener at once. At night, when the sky darkens to liquid obsidian, faint auroras drift overhead, thin ribbons of color that form 7 concentric rings. Each pulse synchronizes with my heartbeat. I whisper into the silence, not to summon, but to remember. We tune the world, I tell the wind. We meant to perfect it. The air replies with warmth that feels like forgiveness. I wonder what the Emperor would think of this. Perhaps he, too, listens through frequencies beyond prayer. Perhaps he measures devotion not by words, but by endurance, the persistence of a soul still vibrating after everything else has gone still. If so, then I remain faithful. I endure. The hum grows softer as I finish this record. It feels like breathing in reverse, as though the planet exhales through me. I let it. The resonance moves outward, expanding into the waiting sky. My heartbeat slows until it merges with the note. The air trembles once more, gentle as absolution. Now the air sings what I no longer can.